Curious all of a sudden.
Oh, no,
It's
sun's
a 2-minute
shining.
countdown.
Yeah.
I think Counselor Forster is place of
Fresh out.
fresh. This one. We could all just- This thing doesn't. Yeah. It was true. Yeah. Oh. Let me think about it. Yeah, she said.
Stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Cecily, roll call, please.
Counselor Gorley,
Here.
Counselor Richards, Counselor Sanchez, Counselor Thorstad,
Here.
Counselor Trask,
Here.
President Pro Tem Mahler,
Here.
Mayor Coleman,
Present.
Committee Member Carranza,
Here.
Committee Member Frenzel, Committee Member Brianna, Committee Member Bechtel,
Here.
Committee Member Gerson,
Here.
Committee Member Marvin, Committee Member White.
Here.
Oh, I can't count. Let the record show that we have 11 present and 3 absent. Did I count that correctly? Before we get started on the first item on the agenda, which is the election of a chair, I just want to say thank you all for being here. For those that are interested in the budget, but also the citizens who have chosen to serve in this way. It's really an important matter, and we're grateful for your keen eye on this and your assistance. So thank you all for being here. We are now going to elect a chair to run this meeting and any meetings that need to be happen afterwards as a budget committee. Usually last year we did this in one, but we may have to do it in multiple. So we don't know. We're hoping to accomplish it. So I will take nominations for chair.
I nominate Matthew Bechter.
Okay, I have a nomination for Matthew, and any other nominations from the floor?
I'll accept the
You'll
nomination.
accept the nomination? Okay. So we will now take a vote on the nomination for, I need somebody to move. Can you? All right, motion and a second on that motion? Okay. All right, go ahead, Cecily. Take a vote for Matthew Bechtel to be.
Counselor Sanchez.
Yeah.
Counselor Thorstad,
Yes.
Counselor Trask,
Yes.
President Pro Tem Mahler,
Yes.
Mayor Coleman,
Yes.
Committee Member Carranza,
Yes.
Committee Member Frenzel, Committee Member Bechtel,
Yes.
Committee Member Gerson,
Yes.
Committee Member White, and Counselor Gorley.
Let me think about it.
Hammer that thing a couple times.
I believe that was unanimous. So
Yes.
Chair Bechtel, you are now in charge of the rest of the meeting.
Say we open the meeting. All right, city manager, would you?
First.
Right, okay.
He doesn't have a scripture, so.
And can I get a motion to approve the minutes from last year?
So moved.
Second.
Meeting's approved.
He won't show you.
Motion.
Approves the minutes of our. So. We have them,
It was,
something helping.
it was motioned and seconded, yeah.
Okay, so
Second.
say, please, roll call.
Oh, can we get a roll call?
Counselor Corsac?
Yes.
Counselor Trask?
Yes.
President Pro Tem Mueller?
Yes.
Mayor Coleman?
Yes.
Committee Member Carranza?
Yes.
Committee Member Frenzel?
Yes.
Committee Member Bechtel?
Approved.
Committee Member Gerson?
Yes.
Committee Member White?
Yes.
Counselor Gorley?
Yes.
Counselor Sanchez?
Yes.
Is there any public comment? No public comment.
That's, city manager.
Okay, city manager, will you please do the budget presentation?
Absolutely. So first off, congratulations, Chair Bechtel, and you're doing great. Just feel free to ask questions as you're going through it. No problem. So I'm going to actually turn it over to our Finance Director, Matt Brown, for a little while, and then I will be speaking in just a moment.
Great. Thank you very much. So for those that don't know me, my name is Matt Brown. I'm the Contracted Finance Director for the City of Sweet Home. I've been with the city for a couple of years now, and I'm happy to be here. So please don't hesitate during the presentation to interrupt me, ask any questions that you may have, as well as there will be some opportunities for some breaks for you to feel free to interject any additional comments or questions. Are there any questions before I get started? Okay. So some of you may have seen parts of this presentation from last year. For those that are new, though, we'd like to kind of just give a general overview of the purpose of the Budget Committee and why we're here and what the process looks like. So the Budget Committee has basically essentially one question to answer as you review the budget and look to approve it. It is to recognize that the city budget is aligned with the goals that are set by the City Council. So your question is basically, does the numbers that we're presenting, the work that we're doing for next fiscal year, meet the goals of the City Council? And that is what you are here to approve. So once you actually approve the budget tonight, it goes to a city council. There is an opportunity for an additional public comment because the city council will hold a public hearing. And then after that, the city council may choose to either at the same evening after the public hearing or at a follow-up meeting actually adopt the budget for next fiscal year. The Oregon minimum standards for Oregon budget law requires that a budget must be passed by June 30th for the city to spend any single dollar July 1st or afterwards. So the goal is always to pass the budget, usually at the last council meeting before the June 30th deadline. Okay. So a couple things that we're going to go over here and you will see during the presentation is governmental fund accounting is a little bit different than a standard business. For governmental fund accounting, we essentially like to put things into buckets of purpose. So each bucket receives a certain amount of revenue from a certain source, and that revenue source may have specific guidelines on what can and cannot be spent. And so to make sure that we don't commingle funds or spend something on something that we shouldn't, we put things into buckets. These buckets are called funds. So you'll see often we'll talk about the general fund or a transportation fund or a water fund. Those are essentially individual buckets of money that we receive and we spend money out of. The fund structure of the city, so these would be how the buckets are organized. For how Oregon sets up their fund accounting, the city elects to have 4 large buckets. First one is the general fund. The second is special revenue funds. The third is reserve funds, and the four is enterprise funds. So within those large buckets, there are smaller buckets that are within those categories. And that is how the fund structure of the city is set up. So you can see each fund with its specific number and what category each of those funds fall into as far as the Oregon minimum standards for governmental accounting. And we're going to go through all of these funds tonight. So you'll see exactly what money comes in, what money goes out, and how each fund is used and spent on city processes, expenditures, capital projects, all sorts of things. Any questions?
Specific rules that are different.
There are specific rules set up for the larger buckets. Excuse me. So the general fund is understood to mainly be a large portion of the general operations of city government. So these are often things that fall into the general fund that cannot sustain themselves. Oftentimes, now this is not like the city of Sweet Home, but oftentimes things like the police, library, administration, building and planning department, parks, those types of departments will be put into a general fund that pool their resources together from things like property taxes or support service charges, something that we can all we all share this big pool of money, because we know that police don't officially bring in enough money to sustain themselves. So that's typically why a department is within the general fund. Sweet Home is a little bit different and very lucky, in my opinion, compared to working with other cities, because you have a local option levy specifically for your police and specifically for your library. These are two departments that in a majority of other cities have to rely on funds and resources from property taxes that have to share those resources with other departments. So it can become more difficult as times get tight. Revenues start to shrink up a little bit. That's why you see a lot of cities these days starting to take cuts in their budgets and departments because they only have a certain amount of resources that they can spend within the general fund. So things like special revenues would be mostly things like grants. Your transportation is funded in there. That gets your motor vehicle tax money comes in. So that goes into a specific fund that can only be spent on those certain things related to transportation. And then you have a few special funds that are set up specifically for Sweet Home because you receive certain monies specifically for a purpose. Your reserve funds are just that, typically reserve funds, a place where you can park money for future uses and expenditures that you plan on in the future. And then your enterprise funds, the enterprise funds are really the only place in a government where you look to operate like a business. So your water fund, your sewer fund, your storm fund, those are all fees that you receive on your utility bill that all of your customers pay. So you, in a perfect world, your water fund is self-sustainable. Your sewer fund and your storm fund are self-sustainable between all of your expenditures of operations, capital, debt service, those kind of things. So your enterprises are where your business-like operations would come from in a government. So we already did little echo there. So I will hand it back to the city manager to read her budget message for fiscal year 25.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for being here tonight too. I'm very excited to go over this budget, and I'm really looking forward to any questions that you all may have. We are in a very fortunate position right now. And so just excited to work with you all tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and read my city manager message. So, dear Honorable Mayor Coleman, members of the Sweet Home City Council, Budget Committee members, and residents of the City of Sweet Home, it is with great pleasure that we present to you the proposed fiscal year budget beginning July 1st, 2024 and ending June 30th, 20 review. City staff has worked very hard on preparing this budget, as well as making sure that it is balanced and keeps us financially solvent. The budget document has been prepared to satisfy the legal requirements of the state of Oregon budget law, local government accounting standards, and the City of Sweet Home's financial policies. The overall budget for fiscal year 2024 to 2025 totals $97,654,000. This total includes capital projects, including the Mahler wastewater treatment plant. While many other cities are currently facing a deficit, we feel extremely fortunate to not only be financially stable over the next year, but to also be able to complete several capital projects set by the council's goals, as well as having a solid strategy to start construction on the Mahler wastewater treatment plant, which has been an ongoing challenge for over 25 years. We will still need to be financially conservative during the next year in order to be well positioned for these large projects, as well as being poised to handle any challenges the fluctuating economy may cause. Because of the way our accumulated, our revenues should continue to stay stable than many cities, but we will need to continue to plan for replacing and repairing our aging infrastructure. The overall budget structure was updated last year to simplify the budget process and make it more transparent. This budget is still in keeping with the City of Sweet Home's financial policies. This message highlights the activity of some of the major changes in each of the city's funds and service areas. Our employees continue to be our most valuable source and high-quality services that our residents deserve. During this time of national turnover and the high cost that turnover brings both financially and in the potential disruption of services, we made sure to negotiate a mutually beneficial contract to retain employees while staying financially prudent. The cost of personnel services includes manageable increases for unrepresented staff with a 4% cost of living adjustment beginning July 1st, 2024. The staff represented by AFSCME have a budgeted amount of 4% based on their negotiated contract, and the negotiated 4% increase for the police department is also already accounted for. CIS is increasing insurance costs by 9.4% in Regents Insurance and 5.8% in Delta Insurance starting January 1st, 2025. This increase has already been accounted for in the budget. There are a few staffing changes this year, and we have also combined some divisions into the general fund. So general fund. The general fund is an unrestricted fund that allocates property taxes, franchise fees, taxes, and other revenues to fund services for community and economic development, municipal court, parks, communication, finance, administrative services, including HR, the community center, and non-departmental expenses. This year, we have also included certain grant funds as well as the capital projects that these grants are then funding. The total general fund budget is $6,390,000, which represents an increase of $1,554,000 of an increase from last year's proposed FY 2023 and 2024 budget. The increase in both revenue and expenditure is due to consolidating and adding line items to the general fund, as well as the increase in revenue due to grant funds. We are very excited to be offering additional amenities at Sweet Home, but also must continue to carefully consider our expenditures within the general fund and keep them in line with the council goals. The City of Sweet Home also increased our contingency amount. While we do not plan to spend the majority of these funds, we wanted to ensure that the city has potential funds available in case of an emergency or unexpected capital improvements. Enterprise funds. The enterprise funds include water, sewer, and stormwater funds. You all will notice a large increase in our sewer budget. This is due to the pending construction of the Mahler wastewater treatment plant. The project budget for that project is approximately $67 million. Over the last year, the city has completed the wastewater treatment plant interim project, which has already improved the wastewater treatment operations. And after a great deal of work, we've also completed the funding plan for construction of our new plant. This plan includes a low-interest federal WIFIA loan, which will be deferred until 5 years after the completion of the wastewater treatment plant. This allows us to leverage our enterprise funds and continue to invest and raise revenue in order to be sufficient in paying this loan back on time. We're continuing to work on procuring additional grant funds as well as requesting state and federal funds in order to decrease the loan amount as much as possible. However, even if no additional funds are granted, this plan should still be sustainable barring any unforeseen circumstances. The staff looks forward to working with the Budget Committee and City Council during the budget process this year and wants to thank you in advance for the numerous hours you will contribute to ensure an open and transparent budget process. We appreciate your guidance, support, and willingness to serve the Sweet Home community as you review and make budget decisions for fiscal year 2024 to 2025. In closing, I'd also like to thank the staff and special thanks to our contracted finance director, Matt Brown, and also to all the departments for the times they have spent preparing the budget document you will be reviewing. Many, many hours have been spent doing research, preparing financial information in a format that is transparent and easy for the public to understand. Management staff will be available to answer questions as you review the budget. So it's an honor to work with our professional and skilled employees and community volunteers as we navigate the budget process this year. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. If nobody has any questions, we are going to get started on the general fund. So I'll have the main presentation on the large board, as you can see here. On the presentation itself, I put the budget numbers or page numbers for the budget document on here for you to reference. I will note that on the presentation for the PowerPoint that you see, you'll see 2 years of actual history, the adopted current budget, and then what is proposed for the next year's budget. If you look in the budget document, you will actually see an additional column that is estimated year end. A lot of times there are a lot of things that can happen throughout the year and that we change in the budget. So we've included the estimated year ends because they make a little bit more sense on the proposed budget when you can see what happens this current year at the year end. Do keep in mind that when we adopted the 23-24 budget, that was created around this time last year. So a lot has happened in between now and then. So you'll see increases and decreases throughout the presentation there. And larger differences if you just compare adopted to proposed. So oftentimes we include the estimated year end so that you can see what some of those changes may have happened and why the proposed is different than what was originally adopted.
Quick question before we move forward into this. First script, it shows a public hearing. So are we doing that or doing that later on?
The public hearing I have after the budget presentation.
Okay, so you're gonna do this after. Okay. Just clarifying for him.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So when you talked about property tax and general fund, you're gonna talk about what we have right now as resources for property tax. It says 879, am I right on that?
Correct.
So can you refresh my memory as to how the property tax are broken down and the value of property tax we receive as a city?
So as a city, your general property taxes, let's see if I have that here, are $1.4157 per $1,000 of assessed value. For the city of Sweet Home, you have 2 local option levies that are voted every 5 years. And those are your police and library. Those 2 combined come to a total of $7.85 per $1,000. So these portion of the $7.85 is not reflected in the general fund. Those property taxes specifically for police and library go into their specific funds. And then the portion of the $1.41 is the $879,000 that you're seeing in the general fund.
And so $1.41 isn't what the county actually assesses, right? That's just our portion that we.
That is just your portion of what you receive. So
Chance no.
don't know off the top of my head.
0.3479%. So
$1 basically on that to us.
and if I can add, that is only, there are only taxes that come on property taxes within city limits. Any houses outside of city limits, property taxes do not come to Sweet Home.
I think we did create a property tax sheet last year. We have like a 1-page little PDF explanation that I believe is on the finance department page on the website. We can definitely make that, communicate that out a little bit more yearly to refresh people.
There's misunderstanding. how much we actually get taxed versus how much is split between the county and the state and the city, if any, and what that value actually brings into the city. So
Yep, it's a pretty big assumption nowadays that when people pay taxes, they go to one entity when they're split many several ways.
Matt, we may, because we have new members, we may explain this compression.
That might be useful because that is a very solid question.
well, I feel as though we don't really have, am I right when I say we don't have a say in the rate that's assessed?
That is correct. So back when Measure 5 and 50 were passed many years ago by the Oregon legislature, that changed the property tax system within the state of Oregon. And it basically limited or capped, so to speak, what you can as an organization or an agency be taxed at for property taxes unless you go out for something extra like a local option levy. So at the time that the legislature passed that, it essentially froze the rates where they were economically and realistically at that stage, but they have not been adjusted since then. So for example, your property tax rate of the $1.40, 41 or 47 was based on where you were economically as a community back in the 90s when that legislation passed. Now, businesses have left town, businesses have come in, residents have gained, residents have lost around every community in the state, but your tax levy rate has stayed the same. And that is by design of Measure 5 and 50 that changed the scope of property taxes within the state.
All that to say, it's not something that we choose. It's
Correct.
what's chosen for us.
Correct. What you typically levy every single budget year is the maximum rate, which is what you'll see on a slide when we get to that point of you approving the tax rate. You as a budget committee can elect to receive less, but you cannot respectively request more.
Thank you.
But not all communities are treated that way. It's just those that were under compression because they had. Is that?
Compression is a little bit of a different conversation than what we're talking about. So compression is essentially a house value of where it was 10 years ago versus where it is now, how much taxes are levied against that, and how much of a portion of those taxes can be used for things like schools or let me give you a more specific example. Where I work outside of Sweet Home in Eugene, I work for a school district. We have a local option levy that takes say $4.75 per $1,000. Because of compression, the house values of a residential 5 years ago versus now, the assessed value has changed enough that it creates a large enough gap that according to Measure 5 and 50, they can assess more value in the property and take more money for a local option levy. If there is enough compression where there is not enough space between the differences, then you may have a property that cannot be assessed additional taxes. And so you do not receive any potential local option levies proceeds for that property. It's a really confusing for everybody in Oregon, and we all really love it. However, the process to change it is very long, and I will say a lot of finance directors and city managers across Oregon lobby every single year to have a discussion, because as communities change, property taxes need to fluctuate to account for services that are needed for additional community members.
And
At this point right now, we're not being affected severely by compression. Is that what I think?
we are impacted by compression. And just to add in a little bit of that too, and I won't try to get on my soapbox too much, but Sweet Home was impacted by these measures more severely than a lot of other cities were, because at the timing of when the tax rate was frozen, Sweet Home had a lot of milling income at that time. So when they did their when they looked at how it was compared to the size of the community, it was determined that this was appropriate. Right after that, we hit an economic downfall, and it has made it harder for us to recover because 879,000 for a city this size is very, very small as far as taxes are concerned. And then in order to go into adding an additional levy, we are impacted by compression. And so we would have to look at some of that even further. However, there is some good news. And that is, as our city is growing and building, we have some options to look at some urban renewal plans and some other things, because compression is starting to change for us a bit, because our housing prices are increasing and we're also getting new properties.
If you do have additional questions, I can share out some communication to Kelsey, who can push out basically some flyers or additional information that helps kind of better explain what those impacts of Measure 5 and 50 are on a state average, and how those impact larger communities. I don't recall if any of those pamphlets or brochures specifically address certain cities like Sweet Home and the effects that it may have, but it can give you a general understanding of what those impacts of Measure 5 and 50 have made over the course of the last decade.
I understand there's only 2 or 3 cities statewide that were impacted like we were.
We were severely impacted.
Did that kind of,
That was perfect. Thank you
Okay.
so much. I don't know if I'll remember it next year, but we'll see.
I will remember it, and we will include some additional information of compression and property tax measures in the state and how they affect your community.
And this is one of my favorite topics because I do get on my soapbox about this. So happy to talk about it too.
So I'm going to put a Kelsey slide together specifically for her. Okay, so we're going to go over general fund first, as I mentioned. So there are the summaries are on the presentation. The more detailed information and breakouts of each category are in the budget document for you to reference as well. One of the biggest things in the general fund resources you'll notice is that the beginning fund balance is rising. This is obviously a good thing. This stems from some of the reorganizations that we've done over the last couple of years, as well as we've seen increases in a few areas, specifically like in interest revenue. So the city has a general pool of resources and money that it receives. It doesn't necessarily spend every single dollar every single month. And so this allows us, within rules of the financial policies, to actually invest those funds outside of what we call the pool. So we keep generally the majority of our funds in a state pool account, and it garners anywhere from, at the low range of 1.5% to 2%. At the height of the pool a few years ago, it got up to like 3.5% or 4%, which is still pretty decent for the amount of money that we keep in there. But your financial policies allow us to take a portion of those funds that are not used on a regular basis and invest those in securities and bonds. Not that we're investing in like the stock market or anything like that, but safe securities within the financial policies that allow you to receive a greater return. And so the bond market specifically has been pretty favorable over the last few years with everything going on in the economy, where we've actually seen 5, 6, 7% rates of return. So you'll see in the budget document on page 10, you'll see a line item says interest, and you'll see back in 21-22, when you weren't doing any kind of outside investments, you garnered about $25,000 in revenue from the pool account, whereas the next couple of fiscal years, you'll see us coming, or the firm that we hire to invest those funds actually using your money to work for you, and you see those increases of $300,000, $600,000 for this year end, and so on and so forth for next year. So Because you do have some capital projects coming up this next fiscal year and in the next future, specifically like the water treatment plant, those are some of those funds that we've been using to accumulate interest. So when we don't invest as much, that's why you see the proposed budget of $400,000 this next year, because we're not anticipating that we're going to be able to invest as heavily as we have been over the last couple of years. Let's see. That's kind of the biggest outliers for the miscellaneous revenue, where you see it going from $220,000 to $750,000. Although the other take that I want to mention for miscellaneous revenue is in the budget document, you'll see an additional line item for unhoused assistance. These are funds from the county that the city receives for some of their work that they are doing currently. We are estimating at the end of this year, you'll receive about $450,000. And next year, we are estimating about $250,000. I think Kelsey would probably say that's conservative, which is what we always like to be on when we look at revenue. We like to be conservative in our budgets. So we put $250,000. We do probably realistically anticipate that you will receive more than that. But as I said, to be conservative, we want to make sure that we're budgeting appropriately. But that is the money that you receive from the county for all of your work on the unhoused assistance. Any other questions on the general fund resources? Okay, we'll jump over to the expenditure side. So on the slide here, you'll see just the general categories of personnel services. Those are people and benefits, your materials and services, which all are your supplies and materials, your capital outlay. And for those that don't know, capital outlay is any item that is purchased at $10,000 or more with a useful life of more than 1 year. So a lot of your capital projects will often be capital outlays, and some of your large equipment purchases will also qualify as capital outlay. And then you have transfers. So those are transfers coming in from other resources. And then you have contingency and unappropriated. So a brief description about contingency and unappropriated, and you're going to see this in every single fund. Contingency you can think of as a savings account. These are funds that we put aside. We do not appropriate them for specific uses, but they are available for you to transfer to those specific line items if you need them in the future throughout the fiscal year. So think of it as a savings account that you can transfer into your checking account for if you need money. The unappropriated funds are separate funds. They're in a separate bank account and you can't touch them unless you have a declaration of emergency. So the city council could, if you wanted to, COVID is a great example of when this was used heavily, is the state of Oregon actually declared a state of emergency, which allowed cities to declare a state of emergency. And you could actually use unappropriated funds. Under normal circumstances, the unappropriated funds are basically untouchable unless there is a declaration of emergency. This is a good place that finance directors put money that they want to reserve that they know is going to roll over into next year. That starts to be your beginning fund balance for the next fiscal year. Yes.
Can you explain to me that $115,000 in transfers?
The 15,000?
Well, at the bottom, it says total internal service funds for another 100, so the total expenditure is 115.
Where are you looking?
On page 7 in the transfer column.
Oh, of the budget document?
Yeah, expenditure. Sorry, I thought that's what you were explaining. You were going over there.
Yep. No, I'm sorry. So pages 6 and 7 are kind of summaries of all the funds put together into those main categories. So the 115 is $100,000 for the library and $15,000 for community enhancement. So the $15,000 that you actually see up here on the general fund, this is an expenditure of $15,000. We are transferring $15,000 from the general fund into the community enhancement fund. That is to assist with additional tourism practices and some improvements and increases. Yep.
Yes.
Is there a standard practice as far as how much money should be in an unappropriated fund? An emergency fund?
There are general guidelines and recommendations. Typically, they reside in your enterprise funds, which is where you see more stringent or strict guidelines of what should be appropriated. It can depend on a variety of factors. For your enterprise funds specifically, those are run like a business. And so the recommendation from GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association in America, they recommend 3 months of operating expenses. And so if you take your yearly expenses, divide it by 12, times it by 3, you would get your 3 months. For the general fund, there is no strict financial policy that the city has as far as what amount has to be in contingency or unappropriated. As the budget committee, you can make a recommendation to set a policy. That policy would go to the city council to then review with the city manager and staff on what they may feel is appropriate for a financial policy.
Chairman, can I make?
May.
In the past, in conversations, I know three months is the policy, but I would really encourage almost 6 months. And if setting a policy for that, that would be a strong recommendation.
Discuss that number previous budget committee.
Yes, 3 months is a little tight, huh?
We've never said a policy about.
No, we haven't set a policy, but you should consider changing it to 6 months from past experiences of what's transpired. So I'm just throwing that out for future that I think should be recommended.
Yeah, as a committee, you can at any time make a discussion on motions for that to be moved forward to the city council if you wish that to be. Otherwise, the city council can make a decision on their own that we need to have a decision or process to create a fiscal policy in relation to that. But if the budget committee feels like they want to have a discussion like that, that is within definitely your purview of making recommendations to the city council or staff. So, any other questions on the expenditure summary? If you go to the next slide in the presentation, this gives you an outline of the expenditures by department. So this doesn't include obviously contingency, unappropriated transfers and capital outlay, but this is just per department, how everything looks over the course of a few different years. So in the administration, you'll see a little bit of an increase from $690,000 from 551. And that is on page 12 of your budget documents. Specifically, that increase comes from a few different areas. One is increased materials and services. In the past couple of years, there's been limited staffing out of the administration department, mainly just your city manager. And so as you have grown as a city, you have added additional administrative staff. And so those increases are reflected here in the new budget. You have more employees, so you have more professional development, more training, more operating supplies, those kinds of things, as well as there is staffing increases proposed in this next year for an administrative assistant to assist the city with several different things in City Hall. So that cost is included as an additional personnel in the proposed budget for next year.
You may, Counselor.
So, you're saying the line item expenditures, total material and services, the actual was 1.9 in 2021, 2022. It looks like you guys had a significant decrease. Is that the line item that you're talking about?
I'm not seeing where you're seeing 1.9.
Total material and services, were you talking about that on page 11? Maybe I misunderstood.
Oh, personnel services. So personnel services, this 1.9 would include all departments within the general fund.
What I'm saying is it's dropped off significantly. There's a lot of savings, it seems like.
Dropped off significantly.
1.9 million versus the actual of 1.2 million versus adopted 1.2 General fund expenditures, page 11. My budget is showing like it had a good decrease.
Oh,
We
you're,
saved money.
I'm sorry. So you're on page 11 on the budget document. You're seeing 2.3 in 21-22, 2.2. Is that where you're looking?
The next slide.
So that would be materials and services 1.9 and then to the 1.3.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you guys saved a lot of money.
we,
Saved a lot of money.
correct. Yes. Sorry, I'm trying to, you're not, you're not crazy. I'm just trying to find the right pages.
Show me how we saved money.
We
Sounds
did,
great.
and that's part of why our beginning balance looks good as well. So, yes.
I apologize. You.
Well, I thought you were talking about material and services and personnel.
Yes.
Big savings.
Yeah.
How'd you do that? And it doesn't look like it's trending upwards very significantly, so.
I think it's a little bit more controlled with the management and department heads that you have now. At least from my perspective over the last couple of years that I've been here, there's been a little bit more control in what you're spending on.
Yes. Thank you. Great.
So on the presentation slide, you'll see the city council department going down just slightly. This is to really just reflect the actual expenditures that they're seeing. We over budgeted a little bit in 23-24 for personnel services. And so that's being reflected and pulled down a little bit in your personnel services, going from 22,000 to 18,000. And then your materials and services are staying the same. Overall, the city council department goes down about $4,000. Community and economic development department. Some changes in some staffing that are pretty much a wash between all the staffing that is going on in there. You will see a reduction in the proposed budget of materials and services. Mainly this is due to the abatement expenses. So the city adopted in 23-24 an abatement budget of about $200,000. You've made some significant improvements in some areas. And so that was kind of a big lift in the beginning. And so as you got started on that, now it's more or less maintenance of ongoing abatements. So we don't anticipate that being $200,000 every single year. So that's why you see the reduction to $100,000 in the proposed budget for 24-25. And I know Blair is always itching to come up and talk about community and economic development. So if you have any questions regarding that department, I'm sure he would love to come up and talk. Okay, so we will move on to financial services. As I mentioned, some slight changes in staffing compared to what was adopted originally in 23-24. There are some minor changes in materials and services, all respectively going down. Professional services is where you pay for things like the auditors. That's where I am paid at as a professional contractor. And then any additional contractors that are brought in. And then your bank service fees, pretty self-explanatory. We are looking at reducing some of the banks and accounts that we have, so you essentially will receive less fees for those banks that we close. Any questions on finance? Or
Water bill, paying the water.
for when you come in and have swiped your credit
Yeah.
card? Do we, I think we do charge
It
those.
doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't include that.
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry, some cities do it a little bit differently, so I couldn't remember. Thank you, Cindy.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move along to municipal court. You see a little bit of an increase, or sorry, a little. I'm sorry. Oh, we're still page 16. My apologies. I'm going page by page. So, page 16 of the budget document. For municipal court, the proposed budget is 206. 263 number is wrong. A little bit of a typo there. So my apologies on the municipal court for the 23-24 adopted budget. We should have $339,000 listed there. It is in the budget document as $339. This proposed budget for 24-25 is showing $309,000. So a reduction of about $30,000 overall. The Parks Department on your budget document, the next page 17. So Parks Department is increasing. You'll see a little bit of an increase in personnel services. That is due to some distribution changes within the entire Public Works Department. Each year, we have a list of employees, of all the employees in Public Works. Public Works Director and City Manager review that yearly to identify what specific people are working within parks. Some of those people are fully dedicated to parks 100%. There are some portions that are split among departments because sometimes a Public Works employee can work part of the time in parks, but they also help out in streets or storm or water, those kind of things. So those distributions will typically change a little bit every single year, just depending on the kind of staffing that you have in the operations within the department. You do see a small modest increase in materials and services. Overall, the largest increase changes in personnel services. Are there any questions specifically about parks that we can answer for the budget committee?
So it's in 2024, it's going from 163 to 225 for wages. Are you anticipating we're going to have more people there?
So I want to actually speak to that just a little bit. We're not really anticipating that there's going to be more people. It's more of a shift of the way that we are funding it. Part of that is because Parks is under general fund, which gives us a little bit more flexibility. And when we're talking about streets, we are trying to take salaries away from areas that are funded by gas tax, because our gas tax is going to be decreasing over the next little while. So that's going to be our strategy, is to try to fund our people in other ways. So that's part of this as well.
We'll probably talk a little bit more about that when we get to the transportation fund. Moving to the next page on your budget document, page 18, you'll see the community center department. So this is a change from the previous year. In previous years, the city had a specific fund just for the community center. It would receive money from people who rented out the facility and then the operating expenses for operating that facility. Over the last couple of years, the operating expenditures have exceeded the revenue that has been brought in. So the last couple of years, we have, as a city, had to make transfers, typically from the general fund, over into the community enhancement fund to essentially make it whole or zero at the end of the year. So instead of having to go through that exercise of transfers every single year, we thought it would be best to bring that specific fund into the community, into the general fund as its own department. That way, every single year, if there are overages from those rental agreements and the operating expenses, you wouldn't have to do those transfers in the future. So much like many departments that are not sustainable amongst themselves, the community center has started that same ideology. So we move it into the general fund. It shares its pool of resources and expenditures with everyone. So a pretty small budget, around $30,000. You can see that increasing over the last few years. Utility rates are that, as well as any kind of projects or improvements that are needed at the facility. So on the same page 18, you'll see general services. This is essentially everything in the general fund that we expend that doesn't fit ideally into one department. So oftentimes you will see utilities. So instead of trying to figure out how to split out the square footage of the finance department and their percentage of utilities versus community and economic development and administration and all those, going through those exercises of figuring out square footage and all those things, it is a lot easier to just bundle them all together and say utilities in the general fund cover all these departments. So utilities you see there, you also see at the very bottom of the line, you'll see unhoused assistance. So this is $150,000 proposed for next fiscal year. That is part of the resources grants that we talked about earlier that you received from the county. So $150,000 for materials and services. This is essentially to pay for anything that is non-capital. So any kind of small purchases, products that are under $10,000. And then you'll see back on the original slide of the general fund summaries, the capital outlay, that is part of those unhoused capital expenditures if you have anything over $10,000. Any questions on the general fund before we move on? So next line is the public safety fund. So in your budget document, this is page 20 and 21. You'll see the summary of the fund here on the slide presentation. As I mentioned before, the city of Sweet Home is pretty lucky to have a local option levy that operates 100% of your public safety fund. So this allows it a lot of flexibility, as well as over the last couple of years, the budget committee has approved a lower rate than what could be assessed for the police department. We are proposing in this budget to return back to the full tax rate and not at a reduced rate. So that is why you see an increase in the property taxes revenue in the category on page 20 of your budget document, as well as on the summary. You see that increase from about 3.6 to $3.8 million. Because we have not done it for the last couple years at the full rate, we are not 100% sure what that full amount is going to be received as far as resources. So we're estimating an increase, but like I've said in the past, we like to be conservative and not over budget money before we get it. So we're budgeting a little bit more. We do anticipate you probably will get a little bit more than 3.8. We just don't know how much. Any other questions on the public safety resources? Go ahead.
So when you're talking about we didn't receive the full value of that levy, is that what we're talking about?
So that dollar per $1,000 of assessed value, over the last 2 years, you have adopted a resolution that is less than the actual full value that you could.
Correct. I remember.
Yep.
And so now we're suggesting to take that back?
The proposal for this next upcoming budget year is to actually adopt it at the full rate. So people would be assessed the full rate of the public safety levy compared to the reduced rate. So we'll jump over to the expenditure side of the public safety fund. You will see an increase in personnel services. This is attributed to some additional staffing that they have, as well as the COLA increase that your city manager mentioned in her budget message. You do see an increase in materials and services for a variety of items. There is body cameras. That's what I was forgetting. An increase in operating supplies for body cameras that will be purchased this next fiscal year, as well as a number of other increases in materials and services that you will see. I am happy to answer specific questions if I can on materials and services, but I know Kelsey is right next door as well. So do you have any questions on the public safety fund expenditures that we can answer?
Go ahead.
Just a clarification, the increase going to full amount as, is that also because of the school resource officer was implemented? That part of it,
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
school resource officer, we reestablished that, is that a lot of the reason?
That's part of it. One of the bigger pieces is actually we have that new traffic officer position, and that's going to be finally coming through. So there's both pieces, and for the first time, and everyone knock on wood, we are fully staffed in quite some time. So that's also why you're going to see a little bit of a shift.
Brought that up, clarification, so that everyone understands why. we're
Appreciate
going-
that.
Going for the full amount, not because Council Sanchez, remember, we voted to save the citizens money because we weren't spending all the money on everything that was there.
I think I was concerned about not taking the full amount that they voted on,
Yeah.
because one day we would have to ask for it back.
Yeah.
Is what I remember. So that's my concern.
And then regarding material and services, that will also cover some additional potential radar equipment and things like that too. So we're trying to make sure that there's some level.
Chair Bechtel, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
I think you're excited to share this, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask. We already have body cameras. Why are we spending some more?
Thank you for asking that, because I did really want to share. And I also will ask Chief Ogden to add anything that I may forget. But we're looking at body cameras that I think will really help support both our community, but also our officers. These body cameras, if an officer is injured and knocked down after 20 seconds, is that right? 10 seconds, even better. A notification is sent to dispatch so that they can know to send additional officers out, to send out EMS to take care of our officers. They will also send videos of any particular like perpetrators so that officers can go ahead and follow them and prevent additional crime. So this is really exciting technology to be able to have in a small city like Sweet Home. But even more importantly, it's going to protect our officers and keep them safe. So I'm really excited about this. Anything else you want to add?
Trying to get all of that over there in a seamless way is really good. So we're excited about partnering with them because hopefully we're kind of hoping that maybe other agencies would see the value in this. And if we get everyone on the same system, it would be absolutely. But it's exciting to kind of lead out in this cutting edge technology. I'm really impressed with it.
Even though I'm joking, I'd like to see a body cam for the dog.
I kind of would too.
Go ahead, Dave.
Can I ask a question? So you already have some? You do have some right now, yes. Are you gonna sell them away or you're gonna throw them away? It's an old system, so the old ones we would transition out. The new system is basically a cell phone that goes in the vest. Everything that is recorded is automatically synced to a box in the car and pushed to the cloud immediately. So everything that is going on is pushed to the cloud. And even supervisors in the office, if they hear something on the radio, they can get on the computer and see what's going on. Oh, good.
Sweet Home is once again leading the way.
Right then.
So I noticed the increase in abatement. I'd like an explanation for that one.
So that, right now, we are going through a transition in our code enforcement to a different type of program. And we're looking at doing more of a neighborhood improvement program. We are keeping our abatements costs for a while we are transitioning this. If we do not end up spending them, because we're not foreseeing that much abatement itself, they will roll over to next year. But because of the amount of budget that we spent last year, we're trying to be prudent in having a similar amount in case it's needed.
Yes. Looking at the projects and programs, I think it was 0 in 2023, 2024, 0 in established year 2023, 2024. Now it's 18,000. Is that exactly?
Is that beer? Chief Ogden, did you want to speak to the, I'm not sure if you were able to hear the question. So the specific question was regarding on the budget for projects and programs. We had budgeted $18,000 compared to this current year where you have $0.
Is that the DARE program?
No, not there. It was, the pinwheel, yeah, the ground, like for the child abuse awareness and all of the stuff that. Shop with the cop. That's all the content.
Any other questions for public safety? A couple notes that I do want to recognize that as the department does become fully staffed, you will see some increases in items as you see here for like professional development. You'll also see increases in your enterprise fleet vehicles. As you get more cops out, they need more vehicles. Those vehicles use gas. So in addition to just generally gas prices going up, you also have more vehicles to purchase gas for. The body cameras that your city manager and chief talked about also have a cost to them. So you see IT charges going up respectively for those types of services.
Chair Bechtel, could I ask another question?
Let's go ahead, man.
So in regards to our enterprise fleet, I know it's been a question in previous budget committees regarding how is our fleet doing? Because we had the 1 year where we lost 4 vehicles at the same time. How is the fleet?
Yeah.
Chief, are we still on that lease program?
And as was mentioned, where we did have new officers, we do have to look at additional vehicles.
The other thing I'll mention with the public safety fund is their capital outlay and contingency amounts. You'll see some changes from the previous years. So this current fiscal year, there's been a lot of improvements to the building. That's why you see capital outlay as a large increase. So compared to previous years, they are getting close to getting to that point where all the big improvements are done. They still have some additional improvements. That's why you still see $200,000 budgeted in this next fiscal year. That's also why you see a contingency amount that is larger in the proposed year than it has been in this past year, because as you do improvements, things come up and things happen throughout the fiscal year that you may not account for. So to have those contingency funds available, as I mentioned earlier, contingency funds you can easily move up and appropriate in whatever category you want. So it just makes those funds available if things come up. Any other questions for public safety? Okay. We will move along to the library fund. So page 22 in your budget book and 23. So you will notice that there is a little bit of a reduction in the fund balance for some of the operations and improvements that are going on this year. Because of those expenses and you're spending some of that money, that's why you see the beginning balance going down in the proposed next fiscal year. You'll see a small increase in property taxes going up about $12,000, as well as anticipated grants that the library will be going out for. So we are anticipating receiving those grants, and so we are budgeting them forth. You have miscellaneous expenses, which are basically a small percentage of interest. That is the library's portion of those pool interest rates that we talked about earlier, and then a couple $1,000s in just miscellaneous revenue that can come in for a variety of reasons. You'll see a transfer in of $100,000 that we talked on a previous question about, that's coming from the reserve fund to assist in some of the improvements that are hoping to be within the library and potentially looking at can I talk about it? Okay, I wasn't sure. Talk about looking at a new facility for the library. So beginning those types of discussions and improvements and talks can sometimes lead to needing money for professional services in some capacity. So there's a transfer from the reserve fund for $100,000 for those purposes if it's needed. Any questions on library resources? Okay, we'll jump to the next slide. So page 23 in your budget document, those are the detailed information about the expenditures. Some slight increases in personnel services due mainly to COLA benefits, those types of things. Not a huge amount in staffing changes, from what I recall, right? Okay. And then decreases shown within materials and services. This mainly comes from the support service charges that you see. So you will see support service charges in public safety, library. You'll also see them in all your enterprise funds. These are the funds that we charge administratively to the general fund. So if you look back at the general fund revenue, you would see support service charges as a revenue line item. Those are these charges that we're charging departments. So this pays for Cindy's time of doing payroll and AP for the police, the library, all of Public Works. It pays for a portion of specifically for your enterprise funds, the people that are staffed at the front taking the payments for utility bills. It pays for their salaries and benefits. So instead of charging them out to each fund and kind of creating this web of complexity, we do a support service charges where it's just one charge to the department for the cost. And so that's what is reflected there in the support service charges. When I came in, we changed to this method because before, when your previous finance director and your previous city manager, they had the web of complexity that many cities use, and it's very complicated and hard to be transparent to your community members about what they're being charged for. So here we have a document that we review with the city manager and all the department heads each year that identifies the actual cost of the person and the services that they're providing as a percentage of their job. And so that percentage is charged out to whatever department or services that they do for AP, payroll, utility payments, and those types of things. When I brought that in, we did kind of an initial look of let's put those things on paper and see how they look. And as we update every single year, we refine the process and we're able to kind of dive in each year as we kind of
better identify what expenses are coming where people are working specifically. So as we revised it last year, you'll see decreases in some departments where we did charge $141,000 this current year to support service charges for the library. As we look at next year and look at the staffing that we're doing, the work that's being doing in each of the administration departments, your city manager's time, how much are they spent working on library specific things, those types of things. We revise those every year. So in this proposed budget, we've taken a look at this current year and reflected those changes in the future years. So for the library specifically, this shows the reduced charge for those support service charges as opposed to what was approved in the previous year. I think you'll see reductions as well if you go back in the police department as well.
If I may,
Go ahead, Dave.
if you go back in the history, some of the people don't know about stuff that happened many years ago about that money that was not every one of us in the whole thing did not pay for that. And it was kind of a crazy thing that happened. And so, but because it went back into the general fund for doing exactly what that said. And yeah, we had a little bit of trouble with that, but they didn't pay it for years because the police didn't have the money. And so it went another way, and it was the proper thing to do. It was, but they should have paid their fair. I hate that word, but they didn't pay for their part of it. And so it was a little bit more difficult.
May I just add one piece too? Over the past, I'll be fast. Okay. Over the past, about a couple of years or so, we have also become more efficient. And so, as you had mentioned, some of the savings that you're seeing in some other areas. And so that's also allowed us to decrease some of those charges as well.
Chair Bechtel, may I?
Go ahead.
So, Megan, I asked him some time ago about computers upgrades, but I see the IT and the computer maintenance have kind of changed. Is that regarding computer upgrades, or can you? Yes. Okay. Oh, good. Okay, good. Thank you.
Any other questions related to library services? Okay, time to talk about transportation. So page 24 in your budget book, we'll go over the resources of transportation fund, which is essentially your state gas tax that you receive. This has been for a number of years a point of contention for a lot of cities because they're starting to see reduced transportation fees coming in from your Oregon DMV fees and those types of things. As that decreases, you obviously have a department that operates from those funds. Those funds operate or pay for a certain percentage of your public works staff, as well as your capital improvement projects that you intend on doing on your streets, seal work, pavements, improvements, a number of things that are way outside my purview of being able to comprehend. So as we talked about, or as the Kelsey mentioned a little while ago about us making changes over the next few years to how we look at personnel and how each of those personnel are charged out to specific funds. Transportation is a fund that we kind of have on our watch list. As we know funds will start to decrease for resources, we have to adjust our expenditures in reflection of those decreased resources. So if we can save money by appropriating some of their salary to other areas, that means that allows you more flexibility to use what is there for more specific capital projects, those types of things. So if you flip your budget book to page 25, and we talk about the expenditures, you can kind of see that.
So over the next few years, you're going to see changes in personnel services. You'll see an increase in this year because there are some COLA increases, there are benefit increases, even a last of making proportionate changes to the allocation models, we still have overall increases. Your rate of increases in personnel are not going to keep up over the next few years with the resources that are coming in. So as we look at this next year, we'll be taking a deeper dive into transportation fund, and I'm sure having some discussions with the city council on what type of options or opportunities you may have in the transportation fund. One area that may or may not be popular, but is becoming more popular, is adding utility fees onto bills for certain types of departments or projects that you may look to move forward. So transportation fees can only be spent on transportation projects in the transportation fund. If you have street improvements that you want to make, pavement improvements, a variety of other street improvements, sidewalks, those types of things, if you don't have the resources to do them, how do you make those improvements? One of the easiest options for city councils can be to add fees onto utility bills. A lot of city councils make it a very big point to not add additional fees onto the utility bills. Unfortunately, it is the only way, because of property tax measures that we talked about earlier, it is the really only way that cities can increase their resources to make specific improvements. That may be an option that the city council may choose to elect or not elect to. We're here to provide information and opportunities and options for the city council to choose. You may choose as a city council to not elect to move in that direction. But that means over the next couple of years, as you start to overuse your resources that you're bringing in, your contingency and unappropriated will start to drop. And you're going to see that in the proposed budget here. As you look at contingency and unappropriated, your contingency with the current operating expenses is down to $91,000. It's a little bit of a change from the year before where it was 170 and almost 200 in unappropriated. So you're using a good portion of your fund balance for your current operations. This is why we have to make changes to at least the personnel to account for some of those over the next few years. We also need to look at what charges you're looking at, what charges you are charging to the transportation fund, and see should those continue, or do those need to be allocated somewhere else to help save money for capital projects that you have coming up. We've allocated in the next proposed budget $345,000 for capital outlay because you have a certain number of big projects coming up that you will be doing that will expense a lot of your funds in this transportation fund. As you do those big projects and everything else, you use up your fund balance. And this is not a fund balance that grows on trees. So you have to make decisions and choices over the next couple of years to how you want to move forward with making improvements like sidewalks, street improvements. So we're not at a cliff point right now for this next fiscal year, but definitely for 25 and 26, this is a conversation that the city council and your community members may want to have over the course of the next 12 months so that you can have those discussions.
Can I add just one quick piece? You cite every time. I will be fast. One is that is the choice that the council can make, is to add a piece to the utilities. So that's one option. The second option is to put it out to the voters for potential increase or an added gas tax to the gas stations that we have here. And then the third option is honestly to just not improve infrastructure, which I would not recommend because we are going to, in a couple of years, be at that cliff point. So just wanted to put that out there for everyone to think about in future meetings.
Question, Chair.
Go ahead.
Taxes, fees, everything goes up. Why are our rates going down? Why are we getting less?
it's a complicated question that the state is still trying to answer. Your driver's license fees, your state gas tax fees that they receive in general are going down. People are buying electric cars versus paying for gas. So you receive less money from your gases around the state. Those are probably your two biggest variables. Overall, I don't think it's an answer that the Oregon legislature has figured out yet. I'm sure you see some of the articles talking about highway taxes or highway fees coming up or discussions like that. I don't know that it's a very clear answer that I would be able to give you at this point. Unfortunately, your revenue that you receive mainly for your transportation funds are basically revenue sharing from the state. And it's going to be up to the Oregon State Legislature to see if they're going to make any changes to those fees or structure or adding additional fees to something else statewide that will help increase your transportation fees that you receive over the course of a number of years. So it may be something to talk about with your local legislatures to see if that is on their radar. That would be my best recommendation for you as a council or as a community. Some legislatures are more opposed or less or more just given the state of Oregon.
I will say that those that I have talked to share our frustration in the fact that we are getting less.
Chair Bechtel, may I say something? So I'll just give you my point of view. I pay between $5,000 and $10,000 a month in fuel, and if the city passes a fuel tax, then I'll just get fuel somewhere else. So I think that burden that would be on our commercial truck drivers and business owners, you're still not going to get the money that you're after because we can go fuel up somewhere else. So I would not support a gas tax or a fuel tax, and if we have to go that far, then it should be a vote of the people.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Go ahead.
we've had this debate before. I personally am not in favor of adding a tax on the utilities, or a fee, whatever you want to call it, on utility bills, because that puts the onus on the homeowner. And I'm definitely not in favor of that. I understand about a gas tax. I have been in favor of that for quite a while because we have a lot of transient people driving through our town that buy gas for their boats, et cetera, et cetera. And perhaps it's time they paid their fair share on that. I do understand the problem with that, but I think that's a fairer way than putting the problem onto the homeowner who already is paying the utilities and then adding a fee to that. And I know a lot of cities are doing that. I mean, Lebanon's done it, I believe. And I just have a problem with that one myself.
Chair Bechtel, for me. So the reason cities are doing the fee, which I'm not in favor of either, is because they can pass that as a city council. And if it's a gas tax, it does have to go to the citizens. But apart from those options, we just need to consider how are we going to make improvements to our streets that are already struggling to keep up with the weights and the traffic that's on them. And if our options are only a transportation fund and a general fund, we need to evaluate where that money's going to come from, because we can't take it from other funds that are designated for wastewater or for water. We can't take it from there. We can only take it for transportation or general. So we have to evaluate how we're going to address our streets, because that's probably one of the biggest complaints I have is the condition of streets. So.
And we don't need to decide that tonight.
Yeah, not a debate or decision that has to be made, but just a heads up that further discussions need to be made over the next course of the year. And to add on to the mayor's comments, you can elect as a governing body even if it is the choice of a utility fee, you can still elect to have people vote on that. And you can decide to make your decision after that election time. So that is still an option. If it passes, you would still have to pass an ordinance or resolution to do it. So getting a vote of your community members is still an option, but it still would need to be passed by resolution.
I always appreciate getting the vote and the input from the community members. So
That's usually a good decision.
right. I just know that this other cities have chosen to do it within the council. And
Yep.
that's how they've gotten a lot of that through on the utility fees. But I appreciate going to the community for these things.
Any questions else that we can answer on the transportation fund? Okay.
So
Oh, yes. Go ahead.
I'm looking at the gas tax as being the main source for the transportation fund. And then there's the interest, but what's the miscellaneous fees? What does that come from?
Those can come from a variety of things. Some of them can be sold equipment of surplus items that are dedicated to the street department, so to speak. That's oftentimes where we put miscellaneous revenue. I will oftentimes just put a few $1,000s as a placeholder because I don't know exactly what may come in over the years, but I know we're going to get something. So I at least appropriate a little bit of something. Sometimes if we sold a street sweeper or something, that would go into that miscellaneous fund. Yep. So not that we advise people to start hitting more street signs so we can get more money, but it may take a lot of street signs. So, okay, we will move forward to the enhancement fund. So this is page 27 in your budget book. So the enhancement fund is home to about 5 kind of little mini departments within themselves. Back before I started with the city of Sweet Home had these in specific funds all by themselves. That provided a little bit more complexity when trying to budget and use funds, as well as it's difficult for me to fathom having an entire fund for $5,000. So what I've done in previous positions is to combine all of these little small things that are essentially improvements to the community, enhancements to the community into one fund that we can kind of just conglomerate every little tiny thing into one area. So that's what you have here with the Community Enhancement Fund. The beginning fund balance is broken down on page 26 in your budget book. You'll see that a majority of that $753,000, I see another typo. So on your total resources for beginning balance, it should be 797 and not 753. So my apologies there. So your budget book on page 26 reflects the correct amount of $797,000 for a beginning fund balance. Majority of those funds are within the PATH program. So $753,000 of that almost $800,000 is specifically for the PATH fund. You do have a small grant for transit dollars that you receive you have about $34,000 as a beginning fund balance. And then others revenues that you receive are your special events. So those would be some of your tourism events that you have. So resources that you receive from those events are recorded here, as well as you have a pooled donation fund that is utilized through the utility billing program. So people can come in and donate money either automatically through their utility bills or decide to make additional payments. And then we send those payments out every single fiscal year. Any questions on the resources side?
I'll throw a recommendation out here. One of my biggest concerns is the deterioration of Weatherbridge. Concerned that we are not putting enough money into the Weddle Bridge is time goes on, Jerry. I don't think $5,000, the way things are going, is gonna cover anything with that bridge. And it really is where status of that bridge right now, it's not. So I don't know. Does it?
It's not because we haven't received it.
So I completely agree. And I do think Weddle Bridge should be one of the priorities that we discuss over the next year. Angela is applying, well, okay, so the Sweet Home Community Foundation has given us 5,000. Pledge 5,000. 10,000, thank you. 10,000 for Weddle Bridge. It's just, that'll be reflected at a later date. Additionally, the Park and Tree Committee is working on doing some fundraising for that piece. And as we arranged our contingency, that was one of the things I had in mind that could potentially be something that the city might choose to match donations or put additional funds in order to complete this.
I know that our city did a phenomenal job going out for grants, no doubt, but I always never take for granted we're gonna get grants. So I mean, if we get grants, phenomenal, but I'm concerned in the future for that bridge.
If the committee wants to make a recommendation to add an amount, I would suggest around 70,000. Then that could be something that we could definitely make a modification and take to council.
Yeah, for a second, I got one question.
Basic stuff though that we can have. So that's what this ground cover for now. For the rest of it, we'll need. So you know, I guess, but I can't take it. Okay, thank you.
So if we were to able to have around an additional 50,000 or so, that would take care of what we believe are the immediate concerns for the next year. But we're going to need probably another 50,000 on top of that in order to take care of some of the more aesthetic pieces. We had an engineer look at this, and then we did put it out for bid. So that we got some bids back. The bids were much higher than we expected, but we only received one bid, and it was from a contractor that wasn't fully interested in doing this. So that's why we think it's higher. But this has been something we've been looking at extensively.
For the budget.
I would say contingency would be the cleanest.
So a question, are we only applying for one grant or because this is a historical building, right? There seems to be a lot more out there for those type of projects, right? Particularly rural Oregon. So you're applying for multiple ones?
Yes, we are applying for multiple ones. When it comes to historical, we do not have some of the certifications for this that we would need to pursue. However, it still is the type of culturally important piece. So we are applying for multiple grants. This is one of the pieces that internally staff has been considering a priority.
Yes.
I'm only one voice, but I recommend we consider it because like she mentioned, grants are never guaranteed. I mean, we do a phenomenal job as a city going after grants, but there's so many other cities in this state are fighting for that same dollar. And so I would consider it.
So Chair Bechtel, may I? Is this the type of meeting where we make a motion in a second if we want it? Because I would like to make a motion to put $75,000 out of contingency into the Weddell Bridge because I'm a really strong advocate for historical preservation.
Is that total?
In addition to what's in there right now. There's only 5,000, I thought.
Can I make just one point of information to interject? So when you say contingency, we need to be conscious of where those funds are going to come from. As far as what fund are you going to take and reduce for this expenditure? So your options to take contingency funds would be from the general fund or from your reserve fund. Both have contingency amounts that you can take. Those are one-time dollars, so they do not get replenished, whether you take them from the general fund or the reserve fund. Both of those funds have contingency amounts that are there to be used for purposes like this. They are already appropriated in the budget. The budget committee would not have to make a motion to move them because they are already, if you approve the budget tonight, they're already appropriated. All that would take would be a resolution change for the city council to move money from contingency to a transfer line item to move those funds over. So if I could recommend that the actual motion would not, it can be a motion, but it can also just be a recommendation to the city council to move money from the reserve fund into community enhancement.
Would we go by consensus or by vote of the committee based upon recommendation or motion? Because I would like the committee to vote.
That
That's
would
what
be
they
up to
want.
the committee.
I honestly believe it's cleaner when we send it to the city council that this fund has already been addressed.
And then if they get the grant, we don't have to spend it, correct? It's just set aside in case we don't receive grant funding.
So the recommendation or motion should just include what fund you're recommending to take it from. So
So I'll
general
remove
fund.
my
or
motion
reserve.
and Pro Tim can go with his recommendation.
Matt, well, are we gonna do this right now then? Because I'm not for this. If we're gonna spend $75,000, I would, if I'm understanding what's going on, I would rather when you get the grants and then put that money toward it then. Is that what we're gonna do?
The recommendation was just to move the money into from the reserve fund, the contingency of the reserve fund into this line item, the Weddell Bridge, so that if we don't get the grant money, their money would be there, is what I understand from those two counselors.
Okay.
So we wouldn't be spending it. We're just saying if we don't get the
I
grant.
just want to make sure I was clear.
We have that money. In case we do not get the grant.
And we can leverage it.
Mhm.
And we can
We
leverage
can
it.
leverage
Yeah.
it or grants.
Thank you, Council.
I want to save our history.
Yes, we do.
One more thing, this bridge is it's gonna hurt the Jamboree, because they can only put somebody across there at one time.
Mhm.
And they say that if you do more than 50, it could be a disaster. So that's something we gotta be, and we need to fix it. We've been trying to do it for a long time, and it's just,
The Jamboree yeah, they used crowd control measures last year, but I think they have to increase their crowd control measures this year. So,
Yeah.
But Angela wanted to say something.
So, Mr. Chairman, can we just take a consensus of the committee?
Yeah, I think we can do that. We could go with a vote. Or just, okay, yeah,
So I'm in favor of this.
I guess, ayes, in favor, say aye.
I
Opposed, same sign. No opposed? So moved.
Just a comment, this should spur the fundraising for this from the community, if showing the city support.
So the next couple slides go through each of the different programs that are within the Community Enhancement Fund. The first one is on page 27 of your budget document, which is the PATH program. So as I mentioned before, this had the largest proportionate amount of the beginning fund balance with about $750,000. For all of these funds within the Community Enhancement Fund, you'll see that we are appropriating to spend every single dollar. That is to make sure that every single dollar is available to spend if projects and items come up as they may. You may not actually spend $200,000 or $500,000 on the PATH program, but it is appropriated so that if you need matching funds for a grant or something like that, that those funds are appropriated and available for use. It doesn't mean that on July 1st, we're going to go out and spend $750,000.
Could somebody explain the PATH program to those who are new, please?
Blair, do you want to explain it or do you want me to? Well, okay. So yes, so the PATH program is a grant that we received a few years ago, and we've been holding some of these funds and using them mostly as matches for other grants, specifically for sidewalks. We are hoping to do some sidewalk projects this year, including Mountain View. That is going to be contingent on us actually receiving grant funding in order to be able to do that, because for example, that particular project is close to $3 million. So we are trying to make sure that these funds are available with the idea that should we need to or be able to use them as match funds, they are ready for us to do so. If we are unable to obtain those grants, this will roll over to next year. But our city definitely needs some sidewalks, so that's one of our priorities here as well.
So special events. I believe is also on page 27 of your budget document. As we briefly mentioned a little while ago when we were talking about general fund transfers, there is a $15,000 being transferred in from the reserve fund into the special events program to help kind of build up that program a little bit more and continue its growth that it's seen over the last couple years. Any questions on special events? Okay. We will jump forward to public transit. Also still on page 27 of your budget document, it has a beginning fund balance rollover from the past couple years of about $34,000 that has not been spent. Again, we appropriate every dollar that it may be used as a matching fund or potential for any kind of projects that come up related to public transit.
So, excuse me, I have a question.
Right.
So public transit, we have, do we have a share of this public transit with the buses and things that we have going in around the town? Is that our share?
So we are a pass through. And so that's part of it is we get some
pass through.
Mm-hmm.
Moving forward to Weddell Bridge, as you can see, the current budget of $5,000 with the recommendation that we will move funds over from the contingency of the reserve fund into this Weddell Bridge. I believe it was $75,000. Okay, make sure I have that correct. So that adjustment.
You'll see it's going to be way more than that.
But again, if you're using those funds as a matching for a grant or something like that, it can be useful. And then once you actually receive the grant or figure out how much it's going to be, you can always make adjustments. If it's needed more, the city council can decide to transfer more if you would like.
I think the community needs to have some buy-in too, and I think they will, but.
Yep. And then the last little department in the enhancement fund is the program. So as I mentioned ago, payments are made through the utility billing program where people can donate funds to the pool, and then we send those out every single year directly just as a pass-through agency to the pool.
Chair Bechtel, can I ask a question?
Correct.
Okay, so with our parks master plan, we talked about a splash pad. Would that be in the pool line item or would that be in a park line item?
That would be in the park.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to the Willow Fund. So page 29 in your budget document goes through the revenues and expenditures all on one page. So this fund was started in 23-24 as a placeholder for the potential LID, local improvement district, for these improvements. I believe Blair can answer any specific questions on those funds, but in general, they have started the process of reviewing engineering and plans and design and that kind of things. So you'll see a little bit of those expenditures in this current year, but as the actual improvements are made, as you move forward, you'll see an additional loan. Those are the loan proceeds that you see in 24-25 of the $2 million, which is what we believe it will be, our best guess at this point in time. And then those corresponding expenditures and capital outlay and additional professional services for design and anything like that. And then the goal of any LID is that that LID is paid back by the owners of the property along the improvement site over a number of years. Any questions specifically that either I or Blair can answer? Okay. Moving along to SDC funds. So those are system development charges. These are charges that are typically paid when you have a building permit process or a new development come into site. It is intended to be a portion of their fair share of their use of your current systems in place within your community. These system development charges are different for water, sewer, streets, storms, and parks. These rates are typically created through your master plan process. Typically, once you have a master plan and a project list of identified improvements that need to make, there's a portion of those improvements that can be subsidized by SDC charges and fees. And then you can do those improvements with these SDC charges. So this is a summary slide of each of those funds. So you have a specific fund for water, sewer, storm, transportation, and parks. Like many of the other funds, I appropriate to use every single dollar so that it is available for you. However, it is unlikely that you will spend every single dollar in a specific year. You'll notice for a number of these funds, there are a couple years where you have not spent any or we don't anticipate spending in this current year. It really just depends on what improvements are on the docket, on the priority list of the community as well as the city council, and if those improvements are actually SDC eligible. Any questions on SDC fees that either myself or city manager or Blair can answer?
Chair Bechtel, if I may.
Okay.
So the 25,000 for storm material and services, is that for a storm plan? Did we vote on that already, or I'm trying to remember?
Let's see. I believe some of those may have been some of your master plan, if I recall.
Some of them are from our master plan that we're just trying to make sure are appropriated, but you haven't voted on us actually spending it yet.
For the storm system plan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I thought we were talking about it, but I can't remember.
Any other questions on system development charges? Okay, we will move forward onto the water fund. So page 33 in your budget book is where the water fund begins. There are two departments within the water fund, just so you know. You have a department for distribution and a department for your plant operations. So we'll go through each of those, but first we'll go through the general resources for the water fund. Your utility bills, those are your charges for services. Those are majority of your sales, as well as any kind of connection fees that developers may charge to connect to your system. You have miscellaneous revenue. It's about $30,000. This is $10,000 for interest. Again, it's the water's pool percentage share of the pool of funds that are in the local government investment pool. So that portion of that water fund's balance makes up a percentage of the interest that is earned. So I give that interest back to each fund proportionately for how much they have into the entire pool. And then miscellaneous expenses can widely vary from year to year. I usually allocate $20,000 to $25,000 every single year, but sometimes it can be more, sometimes it can be less. It's really, for the most part, a general guess of where those miscellaneous revenues are going to come from. Any questions on the revenue side or resources side of the water fund? Okay. So we'll jump over to the expenditure side. On the presentation here, you'll see just a summary page of everything in general. So this is combining the plant and distribution expenditures into similar categories. So personnel for both departments, materials and services for both departments, but those are broken out in your budgets on page 34 and 35. So you can see the actual breakdown of the specific personnel services and materials and services for each department. Generally going up, materials and services cost more, people and benefits cost more. And so you'll see a majority of those expenditures going up just in general overall. You'll also see that we are reducing the amount of contingency because we haven't needed it in the past. We put those in as you start to do projects. And so the current department director as well as city manager have kind of agreed that maybe $500,000 was a little bit too much to have a contingency. We want to make sure and have a healthy beginning fund balance going into the next fiscal years. So we decided not to put as much into contingency and have more in unappropriated. And so, no, go ahead.
Chair Bechtel, may I? So we voted some time ago, and help me please remember, Kelsey, about assisting low income with the water rate increase. Do we have a line item for that in the water fund, or is that somewhere else?
Trying to remember exactly where we have that. We do still have that, and we're planning on continuing to have that. So far, we haven't had any. 3. There are 3. So far.
Well, that's good. Could it be under projects and programs?
Yes, thank you. And that is exactly where we put it. So I appreciate that. And that is also somewhere where if that ends up increasing, or if we need to do something else there, we do have that in contingency, especially for the fact that this would overall probably be a small amount.
And that's the 5,000, I think, that we.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Like I said, there's availability if we needed to increase it.
I love having the availability, and it's nice that people aren't needing it, it sounds like.
Are there any other specific questions? Go ahead, Nancy. Yep.
Here on expenditures for water fund, if we have another water disaster like last summer, are there plans in here to cover that?
That is exactly why we have the size of the contingency that we have, because we wanted to make sure the general fund contingency, that if there is something like that, we have the flexibility to do exactly what needs to be done. That's a very good question, because that is something we have to consider.
Any other questions on the waterfront? Okay, we'll jump ahead to the sewer fund. So again, we'll talk about resources first and then jump into expenditures.
You can see the beginning fund balance growing from the previous fiscal year. This is mainly due to capital expenditures that were originally budgeted, but we're not going to hit what we originally budgeted. So that in turn adds more savings at the end of the year. So your beginning fund balance for next fiscal year goes up. Your local taxes, those are sewer fees that were not being able to be collected through your normal utility billing process. There is actually law that specifically for sewer, you can actually put those on the county assessors to be taxed. And so you receive those portions that you couldn't collect normally. When somebody pays their property taxes, they pay that back essentially. So that is specific for sewer funds. Not a huge amount, but you do get a little something back. Then your charges for services are your sewer fees that you see on your utility bill. And then your miscellaneous revenue jumped way up to the tune of about $60 million. That is in line with what we anticipate for the loan program for your new treatment plant. So that is the reason for the large increase. Do you anticipate getting all those funds up front? We are only anticipating to spend roughly half of that this next fiscal year. Not sure exactly if we'll get to that 50% of spending, but all the other funds are sitting in unappropriated to make sure that they are available for next fiscal year for continuing the plant improvements that we anticipate going over the next couple of years.
Go ahead. Can I back up just a second, back on the water fund? I'm still on a clarification, something. You said the contingency fund is for because of water, ignites the bringing up the water problem we're having.
The contingency fund in addition to the general fund contingency that can be used as well.
Yeah, because 395,000, we understand this.
That's correct. I was referring mostly to the general fund contingency, which is a little over $1 million, because that would allow us to be more flexible about how we had to spend it.
The reason why I was wanting clarification, because there was a topic of discussion in council where we were looking at over $500,000 added expense on our filters, because it was going to happen again this year. So I was wondering, well, if it's $500,000 more, you're saying the general fund's going to take part and state west.
If we have to take it from the general fund contingency, that's where we put that extra, so that if we had the same piece. We've also requested funding about 8 different places in the hopes that we will get some support as well.
Clarification.
Absolutely. It's a good question.
That won't cover that.
No.
Filters. Just try to go back. I was just wanted.
It's a good question.
Chair Bechtel, may I?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so you said that we're only going to spend half of the $60,000 loan, and I don't know if this is legal appropriate, something that's a possibility with the other half. Are you able to put it in some sort of? This is my soapbox. I want to grow money.
Interest-bearing account?
Yes, please.
I have not read the details of the loan documents.
We will follow the federal laws, but we will also do what we can to increase the revenue from those funds.
Okay, because you did really good with the interest bearing.
Yes, we did.
With the change that we made, and that's a huge amount sitting there that could generate a substantial amount of money. I would love to make sure we research that fully.
We will absolutely research that fully. One of the things to be aware of is certain federal loans do not allow you to collect interest.
Yeah, I was curious.
But there are some creative ways that you can still follow the law and try to increase revenue. So we will be pursuing all of those avenues.
Thank you.
I'll move forward to the expenditure side of the sewer fund. So again, on the presentation, what you'll see is the summary of both departments within the sewer fund, which is the sewer plant and then the sewer collections operations of the sewer system. So those two departments are broken out in details on page 38 and 39 of the budget book. And then the summary detail is on the presentation below. Similar to the water fund, things of prices go up. And unfortunately, that's reflected here in the budget concerning materials and services and then people and benefits. And then you see the $30 million in capital, as we've talked about, and then the contingency and unappropriated amounts. Any specific questions that we can answer on the sewer fund?
Sludge hauling. Are we still looking at the possibility of doing some kind of work on recycling that so it could be marketable rather than penetrating?
We absolutely are. I also want to let you know that now that Director Springman has been more involved, we've actually and with our new sludge presser, we've actually already decreased that by like 75%. So we're going to continue to be looking into that.
Any other questions on the sewer fund? Okay, we'll jump ahead to storm fund. So page 40 on your budget book shows the detail for your resources. Beginning fund balance of 405,000, which is on paper shown as an increase of over $100,000 from the previous year. I will note on your budget book, it shows the estimated year end at $394,000. When we create the budget book this time last fiscal year, we were still finalizing some of our audits. And so we were not 100% sure what those balances were. And so we did our best guess at this time. So the estimated year end is what the actual balances are anticipated to be, which is a good thing because the number is going up, which is why you have a growing fund balance to $405,000. So again, your sales are your storm fees on your utility bill that are paid by your customers, and then your $5,000 of miscellaneous revenue is your interest, which is storm's portion of the pool interest rates. Any questions on the resource side of the storm fund? So moving over to the expenditure side. Again, very similar to your water and sewer funds, expenses for materials and services and personnel go up every single year. Fortunately, your storm fund does not have a lot of materials and service items. So you see some very probably small increases, $84,000 to $89,000. You'll see capital outlay is $45,000, or sorry, contingency and unappropriated, $45,279. Pretty similar to the previous years, no drastic changes. Any questions on the storm fund? Okay. Only a couple funds left. So next fund is the Economic Development Fund. So page 42 on your budget book will show the revenues and expenditures on one page. For the revenue portion, you're really just carrying over the beginning balances from your previous year. No new revenue is anticipated in this fund, or at least budgeted for this next fiscal year. We appropriate all of the dollars of $108,000 in your projects and programs. Blair, I'm sure, can go and discuss probably for 30 or 40 minutes about the grant program if you would like, and some of the other expenditures that go into that $108,000. I'm trying to get him up here in some fashion. So, that allows any property owner or business in a commercial
apply for a grant to help with sod improvements, landscaping, paving and pedestrian improvements, lighting, exterior lighting, things that make the property look better. Right, and so that is available to all those properties. Essentially they can get $5,000 without a match. And everything after that is that match typically up to a maximum of 15,000. That the committee can recommend, and anybody who asks for more than that would have to come to council. We haven't had anybody take us up on that, but there is a potential. But it is a really great program for been well used for businesses.
Chair Bechtel, I just want to make a comment. I think that I don't know when this money came to us from the federal government, but I think that the council has made good use of it to really improve our community as far as those commercial exterior improvement program. And I believe it was used for the town project. So is it being used for what the government asked us to use it for? So I think good job, council, for how we even use this money. So thank you for maintaining that program for as long as we can. Oh, and just so you all know, I have to cut out my daughter's 8th grade promotion is happening now.
So moving forward to the last fund for the evening is the reserve fund. So similar to the economic development fund, you're carrying over balances that are not spent from the previous year. In the reserve fund, again, we allocate all the money to be used. So all of it is either in contingency or transfer outs. As we mentioned a little bit ago, the $100,000 being transferred to the library fund. That's the $100,000 here in the reserve fund. And then we have the remaining $365,000 sitting in contingency if the council chooses to appropriate those in another fashion, transfer them to another fund for another use. That is at the purview of the council, but it's in contingency so that it is available to use. Any questions on the reserve fund? Okay. Then I will hand it back to Matthew, the chair, to open a public hearing for state shared revenue.
At this time. It's 6:10. This time it's 6:10.
At this time, it's 6:10. We're going to open up for a public hearing. So the public hearing regarding the spending of state shared revenue sharing is now open. For fiscal year 2024-2025, all state shared revenues are received in the general fund and spent on general government services. Declarations by the council. Can just continue on.
You just say, is there any personal bias, conflict of interest, or ex parte by the declaration of council?
Okay, so does anybody have a personal bias, conflict of interest, or ex parte information for the declarations of the council?
I do not.
Do not. Do not. Do not.
I do not.
I do not.
No.
So,
City staff shall not be free. That's.
keep reading. Okay. The city staff shall briefly review the basic facts involved in the proposal. Questions may be asked by the council or from the floor regarding clarification of the matter to be heard. Comments from those in support of a matter, applicant or his or her representative shall be first recognized staff. Comments from those in opposition to the matter. Comments from those who are not necessarily in support nor in opposition to the matter. City staff shall make further presentations if appropriate, and a brief rebuttal by all the parties in the same general order as the original presentation can be made. And then Turn it over to City Manager Kelsey.
So now I think you'd want to ask if anybody wants to ask any additional questions or make any statements.
Okay. Are there any additional questions? No questions.
Great.
Just close it out then. Good time at 6:14. What do we say? 6:14 at 6:14, we will close out the meeting. The adoption of the 2024-2025 budget will be on the council agenda on June 11th as a resolution adopting a budget for 2024-2025, making appropriations and levying taxes. Discuss among the council.
So we're having some technical difficulties with the slide, but on your presentation, there is a slide that says approval of the tax rate and levy. That would be the next step. Oh, awesome. It is right there now. Technical difficulties corrected. So this is approval of the tax rate. That is the $1.4 for the general fund taxes, as well as the $7.85 listed there. That is a sum of the library and public safety local option levies at the full rate. So if the budget committee would like to move forward, this next step would be approving the tax rate, reading the motion, seconding, and then voting on the motion.
We need to read it first. Can we get a motion?
So moved.
Okay. And do we need a second?
I'll second it.
So it'd be a roll call vote.
Okay, do a roll call vote.
Counselor Thorstad?
Yeah.
Counselor Trask?
Yes.
President Pro Tem Mueller?
Yes.
Committee Member Carranza?
Yes.
Committee Member Frenzel? Committee Member Bechtel?
Yes.
Committee Member Gerson?
Yes.
Committee Member White? Counselor Gorley?
Yes.
Counselor Sanchez? No.
So motion passes. So the last action item for the budget committee member would be to approve the proposed budget as shown and discussed tonight. The total appropriations are shown in the green box at the top for the fiscal year of 24-25. So similar to what we've just did, you would need to make a motion, second, and pass. I will remind the budget committee that there is still opportunity to hear public comment during the city council meeting. When they approve the budget, there is opportunities for holding another public hearing for the budget document, as well as during the approval process. Any community member could come in and make a public comment during the city council meetings in relation to the budget as well. So this is not the only opportunity that a community member has to make a public comment.
So need a motion to approve the proposed budget for the 2024-25 year.
So moved.
We get a roll call. Oh, we need a second. And second. Now can we do a roll call vote?
President Pro Tem Mueller?
Yes.
Committee Member Carranza?
Yes.
Committee Member Frenzel? Committee Member Bechtel?
Yes.
Committee Member Garrison?
Yes.
Committee Member White?
Yes.
Counselor Gorley?
Yes.
Counselor Sanchez? Yes. Counselor Thorstad?
Yes.
Counselor Trask?
Yes.
Motion passes.
There are not any further questions or comments during this meeting. So 6:16.
Very good job.
Thank you all. Great job.
It could keep up with the page.